Have you ever been hurt so deeply that the very idea of forgiveness feels impossible? The kind of pain that keeps you up at night, replaying what they did over and over again? We've all been there. And in those moments, forgiveness feels like surrender, like weakness. Why should you be the one to forgive when they were the ones who caused the pain? But what if I told you, forgiveness isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of unshakable strength? In today's video, we journey into the life and teachings of Pope Francis, the spiritual leader of over 1 billion people, yet a man who chose humility, healing, and forgiveness over power and pride. We'll explore how his actions, washing the feet of prisoners, embracing the sick, apologizing on behalf of the church, are not just acts of faith, but acts of Stoic courage. And we'll uncover how ancient Stoic philosophy, from Marcus Aurelius to Epictetus, aligns with this radical idea that true power lies not in revenge, but in choosing peace when you could choose anger. If you've ever struggled to forgive someone, if you're holding on to pain that's slowly poisoning your heart, this video is for you. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about the Pope. It's a path back to your own healing. Part 1. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's how you set yourself free. Let's start with a simple but powerful truth. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. It's not pretending it didn't happen. It's not saying it's okay, because sometimes it's not okay, and that's what makes forgiveness so hard. You see, we often confuse forgiveness with weakness because we think it means we're letting someone off the hook. But what if forgiveness is actually about unhooking yourself? Unhooking yourself from the endless cycle of anger, resentment, and pain. Pope Francis understands this better than most. In 2015, during a visit to Africa, he stood before a crowd in the Central African Republic, one of the most war-torn places on earth, and said, "To forgive does not mean to forget. It means refusing to give in to the instinct of revenge." That line right there, that's wisdom. That's power. Because when you hold on to resentment, you carry the pain everywhere you go. It colors how you see the world, how you trust, how you sleep, how you love. And Francis isn't just talking theory. He's lived it. He has openly apologized for the sins committed by members of the Catholic Church. He's met with survivors of abuse, some of the most deeply wounded souls, and instead of defending or justifying, he listened. He acknowledged the pain. He asked for forgiveness not because it erased the past, but because it was the first step to healing. That's not weakness, that's courage in its purest form. Now, what does Stoicism say about this? Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote in his Meditations, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In other words, when someone wrongs you, your strength is proven not in how hard you hit back, but in how you choose not to become like them. Forgiveness in this context is an act of mastery. It's saying, "You hurt me, that's true, but I won't let you turn me into someone bitter." This applies not just to world leaders or philosophers, it applies to you, to me, to all of us. Think about your life for a second. Is there someone who hurt you, a friend who betrayed your trust, a family member who let you down, a colleague who humiliated you in front of others? You're not weak for being angry, you're human. But here's the Stoic reframe. What happens after the anger? Do you hold on to it? Do you let it harden you? Or do you do something radical, something Pope Francis would do, and choose to forgive, not to excuse, but to release? Because when you do, something incredible happens. You stop letting the pain write your story. Let me share a quick example. A man once came forward during one of the Pope's visits. He had lost his wife and 2 children during a bombing. He stood shaking, tears in his eyes, and asked, "How do I forgive the people who did this to me?" Francis didn't give him a formula. He didn't say, "Just pray and it'll go away." Instead, he told him, "Start with the choice, not the feeling. That's the heart of it. Forgiveness doesn't start when you feel peaceful. It starts when you make a decision that your heart deserves peace more than your pain deserves revenge. And that's exactly what the Stoics teach us. Epictetus, once a slave turned philosopher, said, "It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them. It's not the pain itself that traps us. It's our refusal to let go of it that does." Forgiveness, then, is not an act of surrender to injustice. It's a rebellion against being controlled by it. So let's pause for a moment here. Think of someone in your life who may not deserve forgiveness, but you deserve freedom from the anger they caused. What would it look like if you just loosened your grip, even a little? In the next part, we'll go deeper into the actual actions of Pope Francis, the symbolic, radical, and often controversial things he's done that show us how forgiveness can be practiced, not just preached. But for now, remember this. Forgiveness is not weakness, it's how you become strong without becoming cruel. Part 2, when the Pope kneels, the strength in compassion. Let's move into part 2 of our journey, a part where words are no longer enough and actions speak louder. Forgiveness isn't just something you say, it's something you embody. And there's perhaps no better example of this than the moments when Pope Francis kneels. One of the most powerful images of his papacy is this: an elderly man, head bowed, kneeling on the cold floor, washing the feet of prisoners, refugees, and even non-Christians. Muslims, women, people society often casts aside. Let's part there. The Pope washing the feet of prisoners, not in a private chapel, not for cameras, but in a prison yard on Holy Thursday, reenacting the moment when Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. Why does this matter? Because forgiveness isn't just about letting go of anger. It's about humbling yourself enough to see the humanity in someone who may have failed, hurt others, or even hurt you. Pope Francis once said, "To wash the feet of another is not just a gesture of service. It is an expression of love, forgiveness, and humility. It is saying, you are not beneath me, we are equals in the eyes of God." This isn't weakness. This is radical strength. And believe it or not, this idea connects directly to Stoic wisdom. The Stoics believed in living according to nature, which meant living with reason, virtue, and understanding that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You can commit injustice by doing nothing." In other words, silence in the face of pain, your own or others, can be just as harmful as the pain itself. And that's where Pope Francis becomes more than just a religious leader. He becomes an example of what the Stoics called a sage. Someone who doesn't just understand the good, but lives it. Now let's bring this down to your world. Maybe you're not washing feet in a prison, but what would it look like to kneel, figuratively speaking, in your own life? Here's what I mean. Imagine showing up to a family gathering, knowing there's tension with a sibling, and you choose to greet them warmly first. Imagine forgiving a friend who never apologized but still offering them a ride when they're stuck. Imagine sending a kind message to someone who hurt you, not because they deserve it, but because you do. You're not saying what they did was okay. You're saying, "I refuse to carry this pain anymore." You're choosing action over reaction. Pope Francis once visited a refugee center in Greece, where he met families who had lost everything. Instead of preaching, he listened. He embraced. He took 12 refugees back with him to Rome on his plane. That's not doctrine. That's human decency in motion. And here's the Stoic mirror to that. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Marcus Aurelius. Pope Francis didn't argue. He did something. And you can too. Start small. Forgiveness in action can be as subtle as not replying to a hurtful message, as simple as not gossiping about someone who gossiped about you, as profound as choosing peace in a moment when you could choose revenge. But let's be honest, this isn't easy. Sometimes it feels like if you kneel, you'll be stepped on. That's a valid fear. But Pope Francis teaches us something. Stoicism echoes. True strength is being so rooted in your values that no one, not even your enemies, can shake you from them. Let me share a story that might resonate. During a Good Friday service, Pope Francis once invited an ex-convict to write one of the meditations. The man had served a long sentence for a serious crime, and yet he was asked to share his reflections with millions watching. Why? Because Pope Francis believes redemption isn't for the perfect, it's for the willing. The Stoics would agree. Epictetus, once a slave, rose to become one of the greatest philosophers of his time, not because of power or privilege, but because he chose to rise above his pain. And in your own life, you can do the same. So here's your challenge. Think of one small way you can kneel this week, not out of weakness, not to be walked on, but to stand tall in who you are, compassionate, strong, and free. Because when you kneel in humility, you often rise in dignity. In part 3, we'll talk about how forgiveness becomes even harder in a world full of outrage, blame, and noise, and why choosing calm over chaos may be the most stoic thing you'll ever do. But before we go on, remember this: compassion is not the opposite of strength. It is what strength looks like when it loves. We're now in part 3 of this journey. Let me ask you something. Have you ever logged into social media only to feel like the whole world is on fire? Outrage here, blame there, someone cancelled, someone else shamed, dragged, and ridiculed, all in real time, all in front of millions. In this kind of world, forgiveness doesn't just feel unusual, it feels impossible. But here's the thing, Pope Francis chooses forgiveness even in this chaos, and that's exactly why his message stands out so clearly today. Let me paint you a picture. In 2016, during the Year of Mercy, Pope Francis visited hundreds of people living on the margins, refugees, the sick, the imprisoned. But he didn't just visit them, he touched them. He embraced people others avoided. He kissed the face of a man with severe disfigurements. He knelt with refugees who had lost everything. No cameras, no politics, just presence. In a time when the world was busy pointing fingers, he was opening his hands. Why does this matter? Because in a culture of noise, silence becomes powerful. In a culture of vengeance, mercy becomes revolutionary. And what about Stoicism? Believe it or not, the Stoics were the original rebels against emotional chaos. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." If that isn't the core of forgiveness in a modern world, I don't know what is. We live in an age where reactivity is glorified. You get angry, post about it. Someone offends you, call them out. Feeling triggered, unleash the full force of your emotion. But here's what the Stoics knew, and what Pope Francis shows us. You don't have to react to everything. Forgiveness is not a denial of injustice. It's a refusal to let injustice control you. Let me give you a real-world example. In 2020, amid intense division and racial unrest, Pope Francis released Fratelli Tutti, an encyclical focused on social friendship and dialogue. He wrote that we must resist the temptation of closed-off anger and instead pursue a culture of encounter. He wasn't denying pain. He was saying, let's talk, let's listen. Let's not burn bridges we haven't even tried to cross. And that, my friend, is what Stoics call rational courage. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "How much more harmful are the consequences of anger and grief than the circumstances that arouse them in us?" It's not just the wound, it's what the wound makes you become. If you let pain turn you bitter, if you let offense turn into obsession, you've handed over the keys to your peace. But here's where forgiveness steps in. Forgiveness is a quiet rebellion, a soft no to everything that wants to pull you into drama, judgment, and retaliation. Now, let's bring this home. Maybe you're not leading a church or writing a letter to the world, but maybe you're tired of drama in your group chat, holding on to a grudge at work, struggling with a friend who changed and not for the better. You have every right to feel hurt. But you also have another right, the right to protect your peace. You don't have to clap back, you don't have to win the argument. You can choose, like Pope Francis, like the Stoics, to rise above it. How? Start with this practice, the pause. Before reacting, pause, take a breath. Ask yourself, will this bring peace or just more noise? Forgiveness starts here, not with a grand gesture, but with a micro decision to stay calm in a storm. And if that feels hard, that's because it is, but it's also worth it. You don't become free by winning every fight. You become free by knowing which ones are not worth entering. Pope Francis once said, mercy is the force that reawakens us to new life and instills in us the courage to look to the future with hope. Forgiveness isn't just for the other person, it's for you. So you can look at tomorrow without dragging the pain of yesterday behind you. So here's your reflection before we move on. What's one outrage in your life, big or small, that you can let go of today? Not because the person was right, but because you deserve peace more than you deserve payback. In part 4, we'll explore a more personal challenge: forgiving yourself, the hardest and most transformative act of all. But before that, carry this with you. Forgiveness in the age of outrage is how the calm begin to change the world. We're now in part 4 of this journey. Up until now, we've talked about forgiving others, but what happens when the hardest person to forgive is you? Let's be real. Some of the deepest pain we carry isn't from betrayal or conflict with someone else. It's from the shame of our own past decisions, the regrets we bury, the things we wish we could undo. Have you ever caught yourself saying something like, "How could I have been so stupid? I can't believe I let that happen. I should have known better." Yeah, we all have. But here's the problem. That inner voice, when left unchecked, becomes your prison. And forgiveness, that's your key. Pope Francis speaks often about the importance of mercy. But what many people don't realize is how much he emphasizes the need to extend that mercy inward. In one of his homilies, he said sometimes the hardest forgiveness to forgive ourselves, because we know our weaknesses better than anyone else. He's not talking about letting ourselves off the hook without reflection. He's talking about the kind of mercy that leads to healing. Not denial, not escape. Healing. And this is where Stoic wisdom enters the conversation too. Epictetus, born into slavery and hardship, said, "Don't let your reflections on the past disturb your peace in the present." The Stoics taught that regret is only useful if it helps you learn and live better now. If it becomes self-punishment, then it's no longer useful. It's poison. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine a woman who cheated on her partner years ago. She's since changed, could rebuild her life, worked through therapy, tried to make amends. But every night, that one mistake whispers to her, "You're not worthy of love. You'll always be broken." That's not truth. That's the voice of shame. And shame loves to wear the mask of self-awareness. Pope Francis offers an alternative. He says, God never tires of forgiving. It is we who tire of asking. And whether you believe in God or not, the message still holds. You can't heal if you believe your worst mistake defines your entire story. Stoicism echoes this with clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And sometimes that means choosing to look at your past and say, "Yes, I did that. Yes, I was wrong. But that's not who I am anymore." Forgiveness isn't pretending the wound isn't there. It's cleaning it, tending to it, so it can finally close. Let me ask you a tough question. Is there something in your past that still owns a piece of your present? Maybe it was a lie you told, a time you failed someone who depended on you, a version of yourself you no longer recognize but can't quite let go of. You don't need to erase it. You need to reframe it, turn it into a lesson. Let it deepen your empathy, let it sharpen your self-awareness. But don't let it own you. Pope Francis once visited a youth prison. There he spoke not with condemnation, but compassion. He told those young men, "Each of us has something we want to erase, but your life is bigger than your worst moment." Imagine hearing that behind bars, when society has already decided who you are. Now imagine saying that to yourself. You may not be in a physical prison, but if you're trapped by guilt, the walls feel just as real. So how do you start forgiving yourself? Try this simple but profound exercise. 1. Write a letter to your past self. Say what you wish you had known, acknowledge the harm, express the pain. 2. Then write a second letter from your future self, one who's wiser, more healed, more free. Let that version of you offer compassion and perspective. You don't have to read these to anyone, but writing them may be the first time you allow healing to begin. Because as both Pope Francis and the Stoics remind us, you were never meant to stay stuck in your shame. So, here's the truth. Forgiving yourself won't always feel like a breakthrough. Sometimes it feels like a small breath, a quiet release, a choice to live forward instead of looking back. And that, my friend, is one of the bravest things you can do. In part 5, we'll talk about the limits of forgiveness, why forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and how to protect yourself while still choosing compassion. But for now, hold this close. You are not your mistake. You are the person who grew from it. We've now reached part 5 of our journey. By now, we've talked a lot about the power of forgiveness, but it's time we address something equally important. Forgiveness does not mean allowing yourself to be hurt again. Let me say that again, because too many people confuse the two. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and it's definitely not the same as reconciliation at any cost. Pope Francis himself has been crystal clear about this. While he preaches mercy, love, and healing, he also insists on justice, truth, and accountability. He's apologized for the Church's failures, not to excuse them, but to acknowledge the damage and prevent it from happening again. That's a key distinction we need to talk about. Because too often people stay in toxic relationships, abusive environments, or manipulative situations in the name of forgiveness. But Stoicism and Pope Francis both teach us that wisdom and boundaries go hand in hand. Let's go deeper. In 2018, after a series of abuse scandals, Pope Francis faced criticism for not responding quickly enough. Later, he issued a public letter to all Catholics where he didn't just ask for forgiveness, he promised action. He wrote, "No effort must be spared to create a culture able to prevent such situations from happening again." That's not just forgiveness, that's responsible leadership. That's justice with a human heart. Now let's hear from the Stoics. Seneca once said, "A wise person gives forgiveness, but also remembers the lesson." Stoic forgiveness isn't naive. It doesn't pretend evil doesn't exist. It simply chooses not to become evil in return. There's a beautiful balance here. Forgive and protect your peace. Be merciful and walk away if necessary. Let me give you a real-life example. Imagine someone in your life constantly belittles you. They apologize again and again. You forgive again and again. But nothing changes. At some point, forgiveness without boundaries becomes self-harm, and that's not what Pope Francis or the Stoics call virtue. That's what they'd call avoidance, enabling, fear dressed up as kindness. Pope Francis once said something that struck me deeply. We are called to forgive, yes, but never to remain silent in the face of abuse or injustice. Forgiveness doesn't mean turning a blind eye. It means letting go of hatred, while still standing up for what is right. So, what does this look like in your life? It might mean forgiving a friend for a past betrayal, but no longer confiding in them. Letting go of anger toward a parent, but creating emotional distance to heal. Releasing resentment toward a boss, but still quitting the job for your mental health. And yes, it might even mean walking away from someone you love because the relationship is causing more harm than good. That is not weakness, that is strength with wisdom. And it mirrors what Marcus Aurelius taught when he said, "Just that you do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter." You don't need to prove your kindness to anyone. You don't need to sacrifice yourself to show you've forgiven. You need to live with integrity. And sometimes that means closing the door. Here's something you can do today. Take a moment. Think of someone you've forgiven or are trying to forgive. Now ask yourself honestly, is this person safe for me? Am I enabling their behavior out of fear or compassion? If the answer hurts, that's okay. Truth often does, but truth is also where healing really begins. Remember, forgiveness is for your freedom. Boundaries are for your protection. You don't have to choose between them. You can hold both, with strength, with dignity, and with peace. So as we close this part, hold this close. You can forgive someone and never speak to them again. You can release the pain and still protect yourself. You can be kind and also clear. In part 6, we'll explore what forgiveness looks like when it's put into action, not just as an idea, but as a lived daily practice. But for now, let's leave this with a quiet strength. Compassion without boundaries isn't love, it's self-abandonment. And you, my friend, deserve better. We've now arrived at part 6 of our journey, and at this point, we've talked a lot about forgiveness as a mindset. But now it's time to ask the harder question. What does forgiveness look like in action? Because it's one thing to say, I forgive you. It's another to live like you actually mean it. And Pope Francis, he doesn't just preach forgiveness. He lives it, quietly, boldly, and often when no one's looking. Let's rewind to 2013. On his very first Holy Thursday as Pope, instead of celebrating the traditional foot-washing ceremony in a grand cathedral, he chose to go to a youth prison outside of Rome. There, he knelt to wash and kiss the feet of 12 young inmates, some Christian, some Muslim, some women. That wasn't just symbolic, it was radical compassion in motion. When asked about his decision, he simply said, "We must be servants to one another, and that includes showing mercy in ways people can feel, not just hear." Now think about that. Mercy that people can feel. That's where real healing happens. And what about the Stoics? They were all about living your philosophy, not just knowing it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." Pope Francis and Marcus would have made a powerful duo, one in a robe, the other in armor. But both teaching that virtue is about action, not abstraction. Now let's bring this home. What does forgiveness in action look like in your life? It might mean sending a kind message to someone who hurt you, even if you never hear back. Letting go of the need to get the last word in an argument. Volunteering at a shelter that serves people you used to judge. Choosing silence instead of sarcasm in a tense conversation. Giving your sibling a second chance, not because they earned it, but because you've changed. These aren't grand gestures, they're small choices, repeated daily, and they matter. Let me tell you a short story. A man once wrote to Pope Francis confessing that he hadn't spoken to his father in over 20 years. They had fought over politics, religion, everything. But after watching one of the Pope's speeches about forgiveness, the man said he picked up the phone. He called. He cried. They talked for the first time in 2 decades. Pope Francis never met him, never told him what to say. He just embodied what it means to be someone who leads with grace instead of ego. That's forgiveness in action. But here's the thing. Forgiveness in action doesn't always feel good right away. Sometimes it feels awkward, unnatural, even unfair. But here's where the Stoics offer us strength. Epictetus said, "First, say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do." Forgiveness doesn't require that you feel kind. It asks that you choose kindness, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And yes, sometimes that action isn't reaching out. Sometimes it's letting go, moving on, and doing the work of rebuilding yourself without the weight of old resentment. One woman I know, after years of emotional abuse in a relationship, chose to forgive her ex, not by texting him, not by meeting for closure, but by finally deleting the messages, unfollowing his accounts, and writing a journal entry titled, "I forgive you, but I'm done." That's forgiveness too. You don't need to perform your healing for anyone else. But whatever form it takes, forgiveness has to show up in what you do, not just what you feel, because forgiveness without action is like a seed never planted. It has potential, but no power. So as we close part 6, ask yourself this: what's one small action I can take today that reflects a heart moving toward forgiveness? Not a speech, not a performance, just a choice, a movement, a signal to yourself: I am not carrying this pain forever. Because as Pope Francis teaches, and as the Stoics remind us, the real strength of forgiveness isn't just in how we think, it's in how we live. In part 7, we'll explore how forgiveness can be more than personal. It can become a collective force for healing communities, nations, and even the world. But until then, take this with you. A forgiving heart isn't passive. It's one that dares to move softly, slowly, but forward. Always forward. Welcome to part 7, the final part of our journey through forgiveness. So far, we've looked inward. We've talked about forgiving others. We've wrestled with forgiving ourselves. We've walked the line between mercy and boundaries, and we've seen what forgiveness looks like in action. But now, let's zoom out. Because forgiveness, real forgiveness, doesn't just change individuals. It can heal entire communities, entire nations. And in a divided world like ours, we need that more than ever. Let's start with Pope Francis. In 2019, he visited Hiroshima and Nagasaki, cities devastated by nuclear war. He didn't come with political speeches or historical debates. He came with silence and prayer. He stood before the Peace Memorial. He met survivors. And he said, we cannot allow present and future generations to lose the memory of what happened here. We must forgive, not forget, so that humanity may never again destroy itself. That's a powerful idea. Forgiveness as a collective memory. Forgiveness as a force that reshapes how we move forward, not by erasing the past, but by learning from it together. This isn't just spiritual, it's deeply Stoic too. Marcus Aurelius ruled during plagues, wars, and betrayal, but he often wrote about his duty to serve not just himself but all of Rome, even those who wronged him. He said, what injures the hive injures the bee. Meaning, if society is broken, we are broken. And if healing happens, it must begin with us, individually and together. Let me share a story that speaks to this truth. In Colombia, a group of former FARC rebels and victims of the decades-long civil conflict were brought together in a restorative justice program. Some had lost family members, others had committed acts of violence. But through months of dialogue, backed by the Church's reconciliation initiatives and inspired in part by Pope Francis's calls for peace, they began something remarkable. They listened, they grieved, they forgave, not to erase justice, but to create space for life beyond pain. Imagine what would happen if more communities had the courage to do that. Imagine what would happen if your workplace had that, if your neighborhood practiced it, if families split by old wounds sat down not to win, but to heal. Collective forgiveness doesn't mean we all agree. It means we choose to move forward with open hands instead of clenched fists. Pope Francis often says, the world needs builders of peace, not walls of resentment. Forgiveness is how we begin to build again. Now you might be thinking, that sounds good, but I'm just one person. Exactly. But every healing movement in history starts with one person deciding, I won't pass on the pain I inherited. And that choice, it's contagious. One act of compassion becomes a ripple. One moment of humility inspires another. One apology breaks the cycle of silence. This is how forgiveness becomes not just something we believe, but something we share. So how can you bring collective forgiveness into your world? Here are a few small but powerful ways. Start a hard conversation that's long overdue in your family. Encourage your team at work to talk about past conflicts, not bury them. Volunteer in programs that bring together people from opposing views. Advocate for restorative justice in your community instead of retribution. Be the person in the room who chooses empathy, even when it's not popular. You may never see all the impact, but you'll start something that matters. Because as Pope Francis and the Stoics both teach us, healing isn't a feeling, it's a decision. And collective healing, that starts with a few brave individuals who decide to forgive louder than others can hate. So as we close this final part of our story, remember this: you are not too small to start healing something bigger than you. In your home, in your workplace, in your generation. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is legacy. It is leadership. It is your most powerful contribution to a world desperate for peace. And the best part, you can begin right now. In our final conclusion, we'll tie this all together. One last reflection on Pope Francis' Stoicism and your own personal journey toward healing. But until then, be the one who breaks the cycle. Be the one who begins again. So here we are, at the end of a journey that, in truth, never really ends. We've walked through the words and actions of Pope Francis, we've listened to the timeless wisdom of the Stoics, and more importantly, we've turned the lens inward, toward the places in our own lives that need healing. Forgiveness isn't always loud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's a quiet decision made in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's choosing not to hit send on a message. Sometimes it's just taking a breath and saying, I'm ready to let go. But every time you forgive yourself, someone else, or even the world, you reclaim your freedom. You break the chain. You choose peace. Pope Francis once said, a little bit of mercy makes the world less cold and more just. And maybe that's what we all need right now. Less coldness, more justice, less pride, more understanding, less noise, more healing. If this video meant something to you, if it stirred something in your heart, even just a little, then maybe take a moment to reflect. And if you feel called, leave a comment, share your story, or simply write, I'm choosing to forgive. You never know who might need to read those words today. And if you'd like to see more content like this, grounded in real wisdom, emotion, and meaning, feel free to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for future reflections. From my heart to yours, thank you for being here, for listening, for feeling, for being part of something that matters. Remember, forgiveness is not weakness. It's what strength looks like when it heals. Take care and keep walking forward.